Well, F1 wasted no time in getting back up to speed after the summer break, did it? Yet more twists and turns in the title fight, and we're still getting over that rather intriguing Italian Grand Prix. No race this weekend, so if you haven't had a chance to listen to our Italian Grand Prix review, I suggest you do that now and then come back to this one. Coming up on the show today, though, we're going to hear what it's like to start a Formula One race. No, not lining up on the grid as a driver, but the literal process of the person who presses the buttons that control the lights. That's the FIA's Rebecca Lee. I'm Harry Benjamin, and unlike Oscar Piastri, if I was ordered to get out of his way, I wouldn't think twice. I'm obviously joined by the BBC's F1 correspondent, Andrew Benson. And Andrew, it is that McLaren decision to swap Piastri and Norris after Norris's slow pit stop that is still the talk of the town post-Italy. I mean, do you think we'll look back at Monza at the end of this season, regardless of who's on top, and realise quite how pivotal a moment this was?
I don't know. I mean, it's too early to say, Harry, isn't it, whether it's pivotal or not? But it's certainly been a dramatic moment. But then you have to stop yourself and think for a minute and ask, why does it feel like a dramatic moment? I was talking to a guy this morning who's got nothing to do with Formula One, and he said he's a Norris fan, this guy, and he said, and he's a really big F1 fan, but he said something didn't feel quite right about what happened. And I think on a visceral level, lots of people had the same reaction. Obviously, Max Verstappen had the same reaction. We heard that after the race. But when you take a step back and think about it logically, it actually doesn't make sense in some ways to feel like that because, it's hard to argue that on merit, Norris didn't deserve that second place because he'd qualified ahead, he'd raced ahead all Grand Prix. And he only ended up behind because McLaren chose to pit them in a particular order, the wrong order, if you like, because normally the leader of the two cars of a team gets preference on strategy. And something went wrong at his pit stop. So that inverted what you could argue is the merit order. And they set about trying to correct that. So you could say, well, what's wrong with that? But some people are finding it hard to square that with the sort of twists and turns of the natural events of racing.
It hasn't stopped the BBC F1 email inbox from being absolutely flooded across the weekend and on the hashtag BBC F1. The email is f1@bbc.co.uk. So you can send your questions in after each race and we'll try and get them answered. Victoria has been in touch and says, at Silverstone, McLaren didn't think Oscar deserved the penalty that he received, but didn't make the call to switch positions. This time round, yes, Lando doesn't deserve a slow pit stop, but it's racing and happens. That's the thing, isn't it? Pit stops are a part of racing. That was alluded to very much so by Piastri on that initial radio call. But it's an interesting comparison to Oscar's penalty in Silverstone that a lot of people thought was unfair when he had that race pretty much under control.
Yeah, now, look, I haven't asked McLaren this specific question, but I suspect what they would say in response to that was we weren't in control of the penalty at Silverstone, but we were in control of stopping our drivers in that order, and we did make the mistake. Because if they'd done it in the natural order and just, prioritised the lead driver without considering the second driver, they would have stopped Norris first. And, okay, you don't actually know what would have happened if things had gone in a different direction. But in theory, he would have had a problem-free pit stop and he would have ended up second, and there would have been none of this discussion. And actually, in that scenario, if the wheel gun problem had happened to the second stop, as it did at Monza, but Piastri was the second guy, then he would have been under threat from Leclerc, actually, because he would have lost 4 seconds. And that was the margin that they had, 4 seconds on Leclerc in terms of the undercut threat when they made the decision to stop Piastri first for that reason. So, and 4 seconds is more than enough with a clean pit stop, but it's obviously any problem with the pit stop. And that's Leclerc would potentially have been ahead. And maybe that's what McLaren meant when they were talking about the Leclerc undercut threat. They were trying to cover themselves in case of a problem.
That is the thing, though. Are they making things too difficult for themselves? They are clearing away in the Constructors' Championship. They've got two drivers battling for their first ever titles within the same team. And Nick has remembered Hungary last year and has said it will be interesting to see if the guilt-tripping messages from Hungary last year to Lando, where his engineer Will Joseph said, you're going to need Oscar, you're going to need the team to get him to swap back positions with Piastri, come back to help him win the championship this year. So it's not the first example we've seen, team orders play out. But would this happen if it was Abu Dhabi with the championship on the line? Would McLaren even ask the question?
Well, I think that's the thing that everybody's asking now, isn't it, Harry? It's like, how far does this go? How far do they take this balancing out thing with their drivers? Again, looking back at Hungary, it's a very similar situation. They inverted their drivers. They knew at that point, actually, they were going to invert their drivers. It was Lewis Hamilton who was the undercut threat at that point. Again, it was very questionable as to whether he was a threat at all at that point, just in the same way with Leclerc at Monza on Sunday. But they did the thing. They knew it would happen. They knew that the cars would revert, and they trusted Norris to let Piastri back pass for his first win. But he took a lot longer to agree to it than Piastri did, by the way. Look, you're beginning to hear people say things like, I think they're favouring Norris, really. I hadn't felt that myself, and I still don't feel that myself. But when people say that, you can sort of see why they might think it. When you start to add up what's happened this year, they've made this special suspension part for Norris, particularly for Norris. To help him feel the front axle better, and Piastri's not adopted it now. In theory, it's not a performance advantage, but if it helps him access more of the car's potential because he's got better feel and Piastri doesn't need it, then it is potentially a performance advantage for him, isn't it? I don't think that's the case, by the way. I think they're just trying to be fair.
But almost you can be too fair in a way where it starts to have a detrimental effect, because at the end of the day they're not being threatened by any other team for the constructors, so it's not about the whole maximizing points thing, really. I mean, Danielle picks up on this, and I think this is on your F1 Q&A as well, which you can see on the BBC Sport website. She's asked, thinking about the battle between the McLaren drivers for the championship, to what extent does a driver have their own team in Formula One? To what extent are there people working solely to help Norris or Piastri win rather than just maximise McLaren's points?
Well, there are two sides to a garage in a Formula One team. They have two cars, obviously, that they each drive, and each driver has their own team of engineers and analysts and so on. And each individual team is trying to help that driver do the best they can. But they're both doing that separately under the auspices of the same team management. And so there comes a point where individuality stops and collectivism starts. And it's that boundary, that grey area, that gets complicated, and where it's got complicated in a number of ways at McLaren already this year. So the other example that I meant to bring up just in the last answer when we were talking about this impression that people are getting that McLaren might be favouring Norris is the Hungarian Grand Prix this year, where Norris made a mess of the first lap. He was in all the wrong places on the run to the first corner, and after he ended up dropping down to fifth place, I think it was, wasn't it? And Piastri was battling Charles Leclerc for the win. And they kept Piastri on their pre-race plan of a two-stop strategy. And when it came time for Norris's pit stop, they left him out. And the plan at the time, they say, was not to run him onto a one-stop. It was just to do an offset two-stop to give him some kind of advantage over the cars he was racing, which at the time was George Russell's Mercedes. But it just so happened that as things developed, his tyres came back a bit and he felt he could go longer, and he turned onto a one-stop and he ended up beating Piastri. Now, I've spoken to a senior person at another team who thinks that was not fair, that in the way teams run normally, you should never allow the guy who's fifth on the first lap to beat the guy who's second on the first lap by operating a different strategy. But that's just his opinion, And McLaren is saying, well, they're battling for the championship. It makes no difference to us as a team which driver wins. So we think that they can choose their own strategy and try and beat each other. But again, it all gets a bit murky and difficult. And it is a valid question to ask. Well, what if such and such happens? Do they try and correct that? What if such and such happens? Obviously, If there's another delayed pit stop, for example, or in the case of Silverstone, as you said, Harry, earlier, what they perceive to be an unfair penalty, and of course you can take it out to the nth degree and get kind of ridiculous about it and say, well, what happens if one of them has an engine failure and the other one doesn't? That's not the driver's fault either, is it?
You must pull off the road and stop.
And that did happen to Norris in Zandvoort, and that's where Piastri pulled out this big advantage. So I think just to sort of finalise on this, I think it was an easy situation for them all to handle in this particular instance, because Piastri has quite a big lead. And he's still got quite a big lead, 31 points now rather than 34. So it was easy for him to swallow in a way, because he's still in control of the championship in that sense, or at least he's still favourite for the championship. In fact, I think he's been favourite for the championship pretty much all year since he had that strong run in the first few races. He just seems to be that little bit more solid. And everyone has the feeling, I think, or many, many people in Formula One have the feeling that it's going to be Piastri's year eventually, one way or another. But I think if they were 2 points apart with 2 races to go when this happened, then you've got a whole other scenario on your hands. And I think then there really is a valid question. Would Piastri have accepted their order? I mean, all it does, Harry, is just adds a whole other level of intrigue to what was already a really fascinating fight between the two of them.
It is interesting, and maybe it is the fact that Piastri could afford to just lose a couple of points. He did have that little bit of pushback, but in the end, letting that Norris through, and maybe we're just not used to seeing this kind of thing from drivers fighting for a championship, are we? These two are. Maybe this is the new way that McLaren are sort of operating and changing the way we go Formula One racing, because Rosberg, Hamilton never would have happened. Prost, Senna never would have happened at I would say any stage of their championship fight throughout a season. Whereas, okay, last year maybe it's a weaker comparison, but we saw at times where Norris was clearly the stronger driver and going for an outside bet at the championship. I think it was the Sao Paulo sprints where Piastri helped him and let Norris through. And then on the final lap of the Qatar sprint, Norris at the final corner moved out of the way and let Piastri through to take the sprint win. Yes, it's a sprint win, less points. Okay, they weren't tooth and nail, but they have this new ethos clearly at McLaren. Is that all down to Stella and the way he goes and operates the team?
It is, and he's trying to be, he's a very cerebral character, and I think he also likes to control things. I mean, all Formula One team bosses like control. I mean, and Stella's not as extreme in this way as someone like Christian Horner was, for example. But when you go to the press conference with Andrea Stella in the McLaren motorhome, everybody puts their dictaphones or iPhones down on the table in front of him. And we just, being journalists, we just sort of lob them down and they're kind of scattered around. Stella, he always places them in a perfect order, usually in a kind of fan shape around him, sometimes in a kind of square, but always an order. And I think a lot of people see that as reflective of the way he likes to run the team. Now, I think what's interesting about this approach is that he's saying we're trying to be as fair as possible. We're trying to intervene as a team in the fight between the two drivers as little as we can, because we have no need to. It makes no difference to us. But there's an alternative philosophical argument in this case. You could say that by correcting, or whatever you want to call it, whatever term you want to use, these sorts of quirks and twists of the racing fates, you could argue that they are interfering, actually, in the natural order of things. So if it was the two drivers were from different teams and that had happened at Monza, it would have just been bad luck for Norris. Now, of course, McLaren say, well, if it was two different teams, it wouldn't have gone that way. Well, no, it wouldn't. But, so I think this is why it's so interesting. There's no right or wrong answers here. There's no blame for McLaren, I don't think. It's just you just have to look at it and go, oh, well, that's interesting. They've chosen to do it this way. And it's very unlike, for example, Webber against Vettel at Red Bull in 2010 when they were battling for the championship. Although the team, actually, Red Bull, were trying to intervene. They were trying to intervene in Vettel's favour, and Webber was like resisting it the whole time. That's what the fundamentals of that fight were. And
or even later on when you had like Multi 21 and things like that. that was supposed to go in Webber's favour, and Vettel disregarded.
Just went, yeah, must be joking. What was it he said? I was faster, I passed him, I won.
Yeah.
And Toto Wolff's saying, actually, interesting, the Mercedes team principal, he's watching McLaren now, and he said a couple of races now, actually, I wish in hindsight I'd operated Hamilton-Rosberg differently. And he's saying I would have preferred to go more in the way that McLaren are running things now, in actual fact, and not tried to control it in the way that we did. So that just goes to show how interesting this whole debate is. And I think it's highly unlikely, Harry, that we won't be talking about this topic again somehow, somewhere along the line between now and Abu Dhabi.
I cannot wait. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in Mark Webber and Oscar Piastri's next meeting about how the season's going. That would be interesting. It will certainly rumble on in some shape, I'm sure. Now, over the course of this season, we've been cornering various people in the F1 paddock who work in the spotlight and behind the scenes, way more important people than me, and maybe not Andrew. Without some of them, though, we couldn't actually go racing. Like a couple of weeks ago when we spoke to the Deputy Race Director, Claire Dubelman, as well as the safety car driver, Bert Mailander. This week, we're speaking with F1's official race starter, the person who controls the lights.
5 Live's Checkered Flag Podcast.
So this week, I have found myself up in the starting position of a Formula One race. Now, we're actually doing this in Monaco, and I'm joined by Rebecca Lee, Head of Single-Seater Operations and F1 Permanent Starter. Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time out for this. I suppose the first question is, can you unpack that job title a bit more? The F1 starter bit, I think we can get our heads around, but what does your day-to-day include?
It's a very varied role. I look after a number of different things. I'm looking after all of the logistics for the FIA, all of the event organisation. I'm looking after the FIA suppliers, and I'm also heavily involved in the organisation of the sporting side. So that means that I'm liaising with the ASNs, ensuring that we've got the correct number of marshals and the correct number of people on track in order to basically make the race weekend happen.
So it's a full-on role then. How long have you been doing it for?
I've been officially doing this role since 2022, June 2022 actually, the 1st of June.
And what is the path to get into a role like this? Because it's not, I suppose it's not the most obvious of roles you'd think of really, but one that's pretty crucial.
Yeah, I never planned to be where I am. It sort of just happened. And originally I was working for a company called Eddie Stobart in the UK, and I was there since I was 18 years old. I've worked for that company my whole life, and I was looking after the legal compliance and operations. And then I moved to a different sector of the business, the special operations department, as the general manager, and I was looking after the Formula One, British Superbikes and contracts within the motorsport area. So I was looking after all of the budgets, all of the KPIs and everything like that. And then that's how I sort of, my paths from there sort of led me to where I am now. So it was never really planned, it sort of just happened.
I mean, that's often the best way, isn't it? And,
yeah.
And what a position to find yourself in. And we are up in the starting box for the Monaco Grand Prix. Looking out the window, you can see the start-finish straight. Doing this on a Thursday, so everything is still being tested. The lights are being tested at the moment. And we're up in a little gantry, which if you're heading down towards turn 1, it's on the left-hand side and raised slightly. And so we're in here. What are we looking at, first of all, Rebecca? We've got lots of screens and lots of buttons ahead of us. So when you're up here, what is the port of call? Take me through how you start a Formula One race.
So first of all, I'll come up an hour before the race. I'll program my system. I'll ensure that everything's operational. I'll do all of my intercom checks to make sure that I've got clear communication with everyone. I've got the intercom panel here. As well as that, I've got a backup. I've got a mobile Bolero, and I've also got a radio. So I have 3 different sources in case one fails. Because one of the most important things for me during the start is, of course, communication from race control. Because obviously I can see what's directly in front of me, but I can't see what's around the rest of the track. So it's important that I've always got the communication, just in case. You never know. Something might happen just before the race, something might be on track, or there could be another problem. So communication's key.
So, for instance, just to try and give an example, just trying to think where last time we had maybe an aborted start, and the one that comes to mind is, I think Brazil last year was a bit of chaos before the start. It was rain. I think Stroll went off in the gravel on the formation lap. So when that's happening, a car's gone off on the formation lap. It's stuck in the gravel. It's beached. It's starting to rain. There's cars out of position as well. Who's on the radio to you then? Because obviously you're only in one position at that point. What's the schedule that you're going through to get that race going?
So my direct communication is with the race director. He's obviously in charge of what's going on the track. He's also in control of all of the safety. So I'm waiting for instruction from him directly.
As to which button to press.
No. I know which buttons to press.
They're all quite labelled. They're all labelled very nicely. Abort, start.
Yeah, it looks nice, but actually sometimes you have to go around the houses to get it to do what you want it to do. But no, so what he'll tell me, if there's an incident on track, he'll tell me, okay, we need to abort once all the cars have come back onto the grid, we need to abort, or they might want me to red flag. It completely depends on the circumstance. So he'll just advise, what we need to do, and then obviously I'll take control of the panel to deploy whatever message is relevant.
Right.
For the actual start, it's solely on me at that point, because I'm the one that's got the eyes directly on the drivers.
So you can see from pole all the way to 20th and last?
Some tracks are slightly different, but that's why we've got the marshals. So we have grid marshals, the volunteers on the side of the track, and we've also got the grid lights. So as you can see here on the Monaco grid, it's slightly on a curve. So sometimes, especially if we've got 30 cars, I don't have full visibility of the driver. But that's why we've got the marshals at the side of the track, and what they'll do is they'll wave a yellow flag, or they'll also activate the yellow button on the electronic grid panel. And we've also got some of our FIA support crew there as well, which have got direct communication to me on the radio. So we've got eyes everywhere, and of course Race Control have got the cameras directly on the grid as well.
So if you've spotted something though yourself, because obviously you've got a great view of the start, if you're seeing that somebody's too far forward, or a driver might even be waving their hands, are you then reporting that back to Race Control?
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll report, if there's an issue, I'll report it. Of course, if there's a car stalled, there's a fire, there's something that's going to be a breach of the health and safety, I'll automatically abort the start, or potentially do an extra formation lap, just depending on what the circumstances are at that time.
Okay, so ideally though, you have a really easy time of it. It's everyone behaves themselves. They all head off round turn one. Are you based up in the box the entire race?
No, not the entire race. So I'll let the cars do a couple of laps, because we all know lap one's always quite intense. And once we're all happy, once all the cars are in a nice flowing order, I'll turn the control back over to Race Control of the panel, and then I'll be on the communication listening to Race Control in case we have a red flag or anything like that. And then, of course, if we have no red flags, I'll be back up to do the checkered flag with whoever may be waving it at the finish line.
I suppose, have you met some big celebrities along the way with that checkered flag waving?
Yeah, I have actually, yeah.
I mean, what is the best part of this job? You've been in it a couple of years now. What is the best part of it?
The favourite part for me is the community that we have. We're like one big family working here, and we're travelling a lot and meeting different people, and I'm so lucky that I get to work with the volunteers. And it's just about meeting people and supporting each other. Within the FIA, there's a group of girls that we're all working there together, and we're all just really supportive of each other, and we all try and help each other and push each other to do better, and it's just a really nice environment.
Well, I mean, you're a brilliant role model. I suppose you get asked all the time now for advice. How do you get into a similar position? What do you say? Yeah,
the main important thing, for me, when I'm speaking for myself when I was going through this journey, is I think everything you do, you need to do it with integrity. And I just think, listen to people. Of course, choose who you listen to, make sure that you're taking the right advice, but you need to really push yourself and put yourself out there. There's no limits at all at what you can do. I mean, I'm not afraid to admit, when I was at school, I wasn't very academic, and I've managed to get here where I am today because I pushed myself, and I was lucky enough that I had strong people around me that guided me and sort of pushed me and pointed me in the right direction, as well as my parents. So yeah, I think, you know, you just need to put yourself out there and don't be afraid and believe in yourself. You need to really believe in yourself and put yourself forward, but just treat people with respect and, you know, be a good person.
Yeah, incredibly wise words, Rebecca. I mean, this has been such a fascinating insight that we don't get to see enough of. Just looking, I mean, all the buttons in front of us, this one has just caught my eye. Horn, it says blue. Is that literally a massive loud horn that gets played?
It is, yeah.
What's that for?
It's the klaxon, so it's to give everyone the warning.
Oh, for 5 minutes or whatever, 1 minute down. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And you're pressing that?
No, so once I program the system, the horn's automatic.
Oh, so you don't get to press the button?
No, unfortunately.
Oh, I think you need to have a word with someone about
Yeah,
that.
I do.
But look, this is such a fascinating role. Thank you so much for taking the time to show us a little bit of insight for it. And I think we'll be watching the race starts with a little bit more intrigue.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
5 Live's Checkered Flag podcast.
Great to hear from Rebecca Lee, and she'll be once again controlling the lights and the whole starting procedure next time out at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I feel like I would need to liaise with Rebecca a little bit more so I can really nail my eyes to the lights, foot to the floor line every single time, because sometimes it's a bit of a delay. But I'll chat with Rebecca about that. Anyway, Baku is next. If it's not in your calendar already, practice from the Friday 19th of September. We'll bring you live commentary of every session across the 5 Live network and BBC Sounds. Do we expect the McLaren battle, Andrew, to rumble on? Piastri in particular had a storming race there last year.
Yes, he did. In fact, it was probably the overtake of the year, wasn't it, when he passed Charles Leclerc into turn 1 to win that race, and then one of the drives of the year to hold Leclerc off for the rest of the race, actually. It's interesting, isn't it? It's a high-speed circuit in the sense of long straights, like Monza, lots of slowish corners, like Monza. What it doesn't have is the sort of quicker corners that Monza has, or not many of them anyway, such as the Lesmos and the Ascari chicane and Parabolica. So actually, I'm really interested to see how Red Bull get on, because there are signs of progress from Red Bull in the last couple of races. Okay, McLaren dominated in Zandvoort, but Verstappen was a very comfortable third there before Norris's retirement, which got him second on the podium, and then he was an absolute dominant victor in Monza, which I don't think anyone expected, not McLaren, not Red Bull. They expected Red Bull to be more competitive relatively at Monza, but they didn't expect them to be like that much better than McLaren. I think the gap at the end of the race, 19 seconds, was slightly exaggerated by the fact that McLaren were on a suboptimal strategy because they were just hanging on old tyres waiting for a safety car, which never came. But I'm really interested to see, and so Verstappen's been speaking very positively about the impact that Laurent Mekies, the new team principal, has been making, saying that he's asking all the right questions of the engineers, and now they're very much more directed in the way they're going about things. If that carries on for the rest of the year and Verstappen can carry on being competitive, he could play a major role in the championship fight. He's quite a long way back on points, so I think it's probably a bit of a stretch to expect him to compete for the championship, although it's Verstappen, you can never rule anything out with him, but it's probably a bit too much in terms of a gap there. But he could certainly cause problems for the two McLaren drivers if he starts winning races, or if he gets between the two McLaren drivers at the end of races, for example, which is very, very believable as a possibility. That could have a major impact, and because it had looked like they were just sort of cruising to the end of the season in much the same way as 2021 had gone, where it was either Hamilton or Verstappen who won a race, and there was only ever the 7-point swing. It gets there's more jeopardy involved if Verstappen's in the picture as well. So that's, I suspect if the Red Bull goes quickly at Monza, it should go quickly at Azerbaijan. The only thing is Verstappen doesn't like street circuits, but just because he doesn't like them doesn't mean he's not quick on them. So let's see. It's really interesting, but there's some fast circuits coming up: Brazil, Austin, where Verstappen could really get into the mix. So it's there's a lot more now that could go wrong for one of the McLaren drivers.
McLaren may be able to control many variables, but Max Verstappen, I don't think, is one of them. I'm really looking forward to Baku. I think that will be a great race. It was brilliant last year. That big crash at the end, didn't we? Perez and I think it was Carlos Sainz. Lando Norris had a bad qualifying with the yellow flag infringement. It's got it all. So that'll be in a couple of weeks' time, and we will be back for Baku. Thank you very much, Andrew, for your time as always. All information such as session times and exactly where you can hear us will be on the BBC Sport website. Thank you very much for your company. This has been an IMG production for BBC Sounds.